ॐ विश्वानि देव सविधर्तुरितानि परासुवा यात्रात्रं तन्नासुवा ॐ शान्ति 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 Namaste. I'm very happy to see so many of you here. It's a delight for me, and I hope today I will be able to give you an idea, little glimpse into our ancient texts. So my talk is structured a little more towards children, but in between I will be talking things about for adults as well. See, the topic I am going to cover today is basically a story from one of our Upanishads. This is Kathopanishad, and the story is that of Nachiketa. Have you heard of Nachiketa? Okay. Anybody else? No. So I'll give you a little bit of an introduction to the Upanishads, but Upanishads are actually one of the deepest spiritual texts. So it's not fully possible to convey to children. So the main message actually will be outside for adults. But however, I will try and make it a little easy for children as well. Children, in case you don't understand some things, it's okay, let it pass. Yeah, whatever you understand is good. You can stop me at any time in case you have a question. Okay, anytime it's good time. So about Upanishads. Upanishads are one of our very ancient texts. You know, our Indian civilization is extremely ancient, so ancient that it's not possible to date it actually. And again, the Upanishads come from such a holy past that it is not possible to really say how old they were. Most of the authors don't leave behind any mark. There's no dating, no nothing. They were interested in just passing on the message. They were humble people. They did not want to leave their own name behind. So we can only guess by some references. Now, the Upanishads are very popular throughout the world because they contain a message, the deepest spiritual message about why we are here, who are we. These are such deep questions that everybody in the world today is looking for an answer. So that is why they are held in high regard, not only in India but throughout the world. In India, we call them Upanga of the Vedas. That means a subordinate part of the Vedas. Are you aware of the Vedas? Yeah? Okay. So, what are the Vedas? Okay, one at a time. Tell me. Yes. What are they? Don't know? Okay, who knows what are the Vedas? No, I am not asking you. Who knows what are the Vedas? No. Oh my Lord, that's deep. That's too terrible for words. Maybe sorry, you keep this down, then I can see my audience better. Okay, so this is, I think, what Savi was addressing that, our education is so terrible that, particularly Hinduism, we don't transmit knowledge about spiritual texts. In all other, Muslims teach the Quran, and the Buddhists will teach their text, and the Jains will teach their text. Christians will go to Sunday, go to church every Sunday. For Hindus, there's nothing, and even the parents don't know anything. We are maybe from independence, 2, 3 generations have gone, and we have in fact developed a inferiority complex for this, for our own text. Anyway, so let me tell you a little bit. I probably started from where you are, but I have come a long way, and I have discovered that actually there is so much knowledge in our Vedas, and they are not like other religions, which force you on a particular path. In fact, that is why you have so much freedom, because we are not told get up in the morning, do a prayer at this time, do a prayer, that time, do a prayer. because you're supposed to pray all the time, whenever you can. Okay, so there's a lot of liberty and it's extremely scientific. So Vedas are Hindus' most ancient revered text. They are supposed to have come to earth along with human beings, and they are supposed to be the word of God. They are not supposed to be written by anybody. They were told by the sages when it came to them in their mind. Okay, so it's a revealed text. It is not a text which they composed. So there are some myths that the rishis composed it. This is not really true. Actually, the Vedas were written by our God's word. In fact, copying that this importance of the Vedas, all other people also say this is God's word, my text is a God's word, that one is God's word, that one. But the original God's word is the Vedas. Okay, so the Vedas are four in number, as some of you know: Rig Ved, Yajur Ved, Sam Ved, and Atharva. Okay, now there are a lot of superstitions about the Vedas that women should not read, Shudra should not read, this one should not read, that one should not read. These are all myths which have come in operation later, and it is no such thing. No harm happens if you read the Vedas. Please, everybody, if you can lay your hands on any part of the Vedas, it's good. Please try and read. I will try and cover, if we have time, I will try and cover one Vedic month for you at the end of this. So these being our oldest texts which lay down what is dharma. You know dharma, right? Dharma I don't need to tell you. Dharma again is not rituals. Dharma is a way of life. How you should lead. What is the righteous way of life? What is ethics? That is dharma. Okay. So Vedas laid down the dharma for everybody. In that, there is a deeper part, a philosophical part, which covers why are we here, who are we, why should we be doing what we are supposed to be doing, what is the goal of life, where should we put all our efforts. That part is taken out, you can say, of the Vedas and distilled and put in the Upanishads. The Upanishads themselves are usually little written in a what we call Alankaric language, very symbolic. So even the symbolism of it has been lost over time, and a lot of things are not understood today. However, this Kathopanishad is a very popular Upanishad. If you go to in Gujarat, there is this Narayan Swami temple, which is very famous and very beautiful temple. It's there, I think, in Delhi as well. But in Gujarat, they play this story of Nachiketa on the fountains in a sound and light show. If you get the chance, have a look. So I will be covering this Nachiketa story, and as I am going along, I will tell you some Vedic precepts, Vedic principles, Vedic laws. What are the fundamentals of Vedic ideas? So let us start with the story. Nachiketa was a boy. Like some of you teenagers. So he was a teenager, and his father was called Uddala. So his father did a yajna or yajna. You know what is a yajna? No, it is Havan home. Rings a bell? No. In home, we light a fire and we put some nice things in it, like ghee and samagri, what we call, and that gives out lovely fragrance and it cleans the air. I will tell you some more about it. This is just an introduction. So he did this Havan, which was called Vishwajit. Vishwajit Havan. In that, what you do is you have to give away everything that you own, all your possessions. You have to give away. Now, Nachiketa was seeing that his father is giving away all his possessions. And towards the the end, as he was running out of his riches, he was giving away cows, which cows was considered a very big wealth in those days. If you gave a cow, then somebody could almost survive on it because you could have the milk, the butter, the ghee, you could make things with it and survive. So he was giving away cows. Now Nachiketa saw that these cows which he is giving away, they're all old. They're no longer giving milk. So he says they have drunk their water, they have had their grass, they are all old. So, what is the purpose for which my father is giving away these cows? What does he think the person who is receiving these cows can do with them? They are useless. So he goes to his father and he says that, to whom are you going to give me? I am also your wealth. I also belong to you. So to whom are you giving me? So his father said, go away, I'm busy. So he continued pestering his father and he asked him a second time and he asked him a third time. So his father got up in the middle of all these proceedings. He said, I give you to death. So when he said it, of course, he must have regretted it immediately. But in those days, your whatever you said was to be maintained. You could not then unsay it. So Nachiketa thinks, and he tells him also, then it is not as if I am the worst of children. I am the best in some regards. I am middle in some ways. I am not the least in any way. So, what is it that my father wants to achieve by giving me to Yama, Lord Yama, the god of death? Have you heard of Yama? No, the god of death, right? Right. So, why is he giving me away to death? Anyway, so he says now that my father has said it, I must maintain his word. Now his father is regretting. He said, no, I will. You don't have to do it. I just said it in a moment of anger. He said, no, you have said it, and we see every day people coming in. They are born and they die. It is like crops. You grow a crop and it ripens and then it is cut. So similarly, people come and go. So it's not a big deal that I should die. So by whatever means which the story does not give in detail, he reaches Yam's door. So Yama now was away. He was collecting some more souls for who had died. So he was away from his house, and his wife asked Nachiketa to come inside. But Nachiketa said, no, I will not enter. I am sitting outside. And he was there for 3 days. And Yama was out on his food. And he did not eat, he did not drink. So when Yama finally comes back, then his wife says, see, there is this Brahmin boy waiting at our door. And if such a person is there at the door, then and without eating and drinking, then it is very bad. It's a papa karma. You know papa? Right, sin. So please to make sure that he doesn't get angry, you take this water that he should drink, you wash his feet, you wash his hands, you please pacify him so that we are not, we don't get cursed by him. Because whoever makes a Brahmin angry, he loses all his wealth. So here I want to stop and tell you one thing. This caste system of Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. All of us Hindus are made to feel very guilty about it, and we are told it's a very bad thing. And yes, in our society today, it is a means of discrimination, and we look down upon certain people because they are of a lower caste. And also, it is very strict. We want to marry within the same caste, etc., etc. But this is not the original Vedic dharma. The Vedas say that the caste, which is actually not called jati, but it is called Varn. That which you accept is Varn. So the Varn is something which is based not upon your birth, that means in which family you are born into, but what you like to do or what you do. So if you are a child and you are not working, then whatever you are interested in, that will determine your work. And if you have grown up and you started working, then what you are doing, that will determine your work. How? So Brahmins are those who are teachers. They are the custodians of knowledge. So all knowledge resides with the Brahmins, and that is why they are given first priority. They will tell all everybody else this is the right way to do things. They even advise the king that this is your dharma, this is how you should do it. How okay, how the king does, but your dharma is to do this. So they, since they told everybody what their duties were, what their responsibilities were, what was the right thing to do, they have to be knowledgeable people, and so they are the best. Then come the Kshatriyas. Kshatriyas are those who protect you and those who administer you. So the armed forces today are all Kshatriyas. They may come from whichever families they may come from, but if you are a soldier fighting on the Pakistan border, then you are a Kshatriya. Plus, politicians, those who manage the kingdom, like the king, are called Kshatriyas. They all fall under the all the IS service people, they are all Kshatriyas. Then you have Vaishyas. All business persons are called Vaishyas. They are running the machinery of the nation. The economy of the nation is dependent upon them. The money that is being generated, how the nation becomes rich, all that is determined by the Vaishyas. Most of the your children, your parents would probably be Vaishyas. Shudras are the ones who were not able to educate themselves too much for whatever reason, and they are involved in service industry, like your laundry, your maids, your drivers. All these are Shudras. So today, we talk about a Brahmin cook. There is no such thing as a Brahmin cook in the Vedic sense. A cook who is cooking for somebody is a Shudra. He may be born in a Brahmin family, doesn't matter. He is now in the service industry and he is a Shudra. So Shudra, unlike what we feel today, it was not looked down upon. In fact, sociologists say that we made a place in society where even the people who are poor or illiterate, they have a place, a respectable place in society to earn their living and to live decently. So please don't look down upon anybody. Do not discriminate against anybody. Everybody is equal. Please love everybody. Be happy. So coming back to the story. So that is why Yama's wife says that the Brahmin is at the door because even though Nachiketa was a teenager, he was actually, he knew quite a bit. Okay, he was a good student. So that is why the wife realizes and she tells him, you must pacify. So Yama now comes out and he tells Nachiketa, please come in and what can I do for you that you may be happy and you do not curse me. So for that, I will give you three boons. Ask me any three things, and I will give it to you. So now you will come to know how intelligent Nachiketa was. So the first boon Nachiketa asked him is that, oh Yamaraj, please make it such that when I go back to my home, then my father recognizes me, is happy to see me, and loves me. So can you see how clever he was? How was he clever? Tell me. Correct. So one is that he should see he left when the father was angry with him, remember? So now he says his anger should have quietened down. he should again love me as he used to love me before. But before that, also remember that he has died. So actually he is saying that I should be reborn or I should return in my original form so that my father recognizes me and he loves me as before and he doesn't see me as a ghost who has come back but he sees me as something natural that okay my son has returned from the mouth of death and uh, he should feel happy to see me. So in one boon he has asked many things. So see in this story which is built around, please don't believe everything. Okay, this we call a frame. Okay, this is just a little story which is built so that it becomes interesting. It doesn't mean that Nachiketa died and reached Yamaraj and Yamaraj then sent him back to the original body. Nothing like that really happened. And this is not a historical event at all. This is just something to come to the main crux of the matter, which till the second moon will not be there, which will only start with the third moon. Okay, so even the second moon is just a myth, but it adds a lot of interest to the story and we enjoy it. So Yama says, done. You will go back to your father, you will be in your original way that you left, and he will recognize you, he will be happy to see you. Rest assured, he will sleep comfortably after your return. So, first one done. Now, ask me the second one. So, Nachiketa says that I have heard that there is this place called Swarga or heaven, where there is no fear, and where there is no old age, and where there is no death. So, is there such a place? And if there is, then how do I reach it? So again, I'm telling you this is just a story. Please do not accept it 100%. I will tell you what is work after this. So this Yamaraj says, sure. So he tells him about a yajna which has to be performed thrice. Uh, and by performing that yajna, you go to this place called Swarg, where you have only happiness, no sorrow. So this swarg, concept of swarg is again one thing which there are some very later texts which have come in our Indian tradition called Puranas, which have created these gods like Shiva, Parvati, Vishnu, etc., etc. And you have all these images in your head, and everybody thinks that these are the ones. And on the other hand, we come to know that they are not all powerful and they fight with each other very often, and so on and so forth. They very often do things which are not worthy of being worthy of a God. So anyway, so where they live is Swarga. Or there is another concept of there's a different place called Swarg in the cloud somewhere where Indra is the king and all others are gods who live there. This is again only mythology. Please do not believe 100%. Uh, Swarg is where you have happiness and you will be happy to know that most of you are living in Swarg. It is in this world and where we experience more happiness than sorrow. That is Swarg. There are a lot of people who are very poor, living in bad conditions. They are living in Narka. So this Swarg and Narka are in this world only. And if you do good deeds, then you attain happiness. If you do wrong deeds, then you have to suffer. This is called the law of karma or law of action. What you do, what you sow, you shall reap. If you follow dharma, if you follow ethics and do good things in life, then uh, you will have happiness in your life. Sorry, this is some lagging or something. And if you do evil things, if you are selfish, if you kill somebody, if you hit somebody, if you abuse somebody, these kind of actions will lead to unhappiness. Not immediately, but later on in life. God will make sure that you get what you do. So this is called the law of karma. Kar means deep. So that is the now here he asks him to perform yajna. So I had told you in the beginning, yajna, sorry, yajna, as you people call it, or let's call it havan. So this havan or home, which again has been drilled into us by the British that it is a very stupid thing where you put good things into fire, burn them. And instead of that, you should give it to some poor people instead of putting ghee in the fire. Why don't you give it to some poor person? So this havan which is done is actually for removing toxins from the air, from the water, and from earth. The Havan Samagri, the things which you put in the Havan and which along with the ghee, they form anti-toxic substances which get into the air, combine with the toxins and make them neutral, neutralize them. This smoke even rises up to the clouds and even the air in the clouds is purified. So when you have rain, then the air which goes into the water which goes into your earth purifies even the earth. So that is why in India we have been performing yajna or yagya since time immemorial. The Vedas have said it from the beginning. This is what Yamaraj has said. So Paropkar, have you heard of Paropkar? Doing good to others is called para upakar. Upakar, good deed. Para for another. So Paropkar, doing good to others, is the best form of dharma. And this yajna is the best form of paropkar. You are not giving it to a particular person. This havan that you do, homa that you do, the air spreads into a huge area. Some people have estimated around 5 acres. And in that area, everybody experiences the goodness which you have generated here in this one place. That is why the kings of yore, they used to perform these very big yajnas, which used to continue for days. And their whole praja, their people, did not fall sick. In India, if you read about other ancient civilizations, even the Egyptian ones and all, you will come to know that there were large plagues in which one whole village is finished off. You will not read about such things in India because of this. So that is so much about the importance of doing Havan. So that is why if you do that Nachiketa, that Havan which Yam told, then you will have a lot of happiness and you will experience Swarga. So after this, then Nachiketa, whatever Yama had told him, he repeats it to him, verbatim. So Yama is so happy. He says, "Okay, I give you an extra boon. This Havan will be named after you. It will be called Nachiketa Havan. And also, I am giving you this beautiful garland. You know, in those days, even men used to wear necklaces, which is so it's a very beautiful, divine kind of a necklace. He gives it to him, and he says, "You have been such a fantastic student. I'm really happy." That is another teaching for you guys. Please, whenever you go into class, whenever mom says, please study hard, please listen carefully. Once, listening once should be sufficient. You should not have to revise. If you have focused on that thing, it should be there with you. So that's how well you have to listen. Okay, so then Nachiketa asks him, Yam says, okay, ask me for the third point. So he asks for the third point. He says that there is this confusion among people that after we die, do we remain in some form or is that the end? So, what do you think? Do we remain or is that the end? Once you die, is there something which is left over or that's it? Finished. What is left over? No, you are not allowed to answer. So what is left over? Now that you've answered half the question. The source. Right? So we of course have it so much ingrained within us. Most of us don't need actually to be told that there is this soul which continues beyond. See, you people are very lucky to be born in India, and whatever faith you may belong to, deep inside you, in your blood, is flowing this concept of the soul. You don't know how lucky you are. This concept of a soul is not a very easy concept. So, for any normal person, if the person dies, that's it. What is left? Who is to tell that something has left the body? Do you see anything leaving the body? No. So why should we believe in a soul? Why should we believe in a soul? So this is actually a concept which has come from the Vedas, and also of course, um, see some of the aboriginal cultures. You will not know, but most of the world which is near about India, which means Arabia, China, Europe, all these civilizations are influenced by Indian knowledge and knowledge of the Vedas. So, in some form or the other, they believe in the soul. If you look at some of the aboriginal cultures, the native cultures of some places which were not influenced by Indian culture, some of them don't believe in a soul. Some of them believe in a very distorted fashion. For example, if the Egyptians, you see, they leave behind a lot of things in the tombs for the king because they feel that the soul of the king will take it along. So they have this vague notion that the body of the king which is lying there will also somehow go with the king. He will cross a river of death and he will live somewhere else very nicely. So he will take all these things along with him. And of course, we still find those things there. No king took them away. So this concept of a soul, now when Nachiketa asks him, Yamaraj is a little flustered. He says, see, this is a question in which even the very intelligent people have a problem, and you are only a teenager. It's very difficult for me to explain some things to you. You ask me any other thing you want. You want any kind of wealth. You want a long life. You want here are these apsaras, these very beautiful women. You can take any of them. You can make them serve you in whichever way you like. You can live as long as you want. Only when you want to die, you can give up your body. So ask me anything, but please don't ask me this question. So Nachiketa says that you yourself are saying that this question has befuddled people who are intelligent. People who are intelligent also don't know the answer to this question. Where will I find a teacher like you who understands this? I may not find a teacher who really can teach me this subject. So today I have found you and I want to learn this from you. And all these things you are telling me, this she actually gives a very beautiful verse there. I would like to tell you, just let me give you the main story, then I will read out that verse to you. So he says all these things, they are here today, gone tomorrow. They will just make me weak. You know, our desire for things is never fulfilled. Today you want a mobile, tomorrow you want an iPad, tomorrow you want something else. It's never that when you get a thing, you are happy for a few instance, right? Right? You would have experienced this. In your short life, you will know. Always you want. Then you get. It gives you happiness for just few days maybe at the most. And then it is no longer something which you might even throw it and you don't even look at it. So these things never fulfill us for a long time. So why should I even ask for these things? And now that I have spoken to you, and you are going to give me, I hope, this knowledge, then automatically I will get all these things. Who cares? I will get them for sure. So I want to I give up all these. I don't want any of these. You please tell me this question you have to answer. So Yama is again very thrilled to find a student who has given up all temptations, all things which normally will attract people. And 99.99% of this whole human race will run after worldly things, what we call worldly things, things which you see, which you can hold, which you can touch. And they never look for spiritual things. We never look what is good for our soul. We understand that there is a soul, but then we should be feeding our soul something, right? But we are only feeding our body. The body is not our soul. Now, how do we feed our soul? So this whole Upanishad, after that, tells you how to feed your soul. So let me read a small verse for you. It's a beautiful verse. First, I will tell you what Nachiketa says to Yamraj. शोभामात्यस्य यदन्तकेतत् सर्वेन्द्रियाणां जरयन्ति तेजः अपि सर्वं जीवितमल्पमेव तवेव वास्तवनित्यगीते. This is the reply which Nachiketa gives Yama. He says that all these things in this world are Shobhava. Here today, gone tomorrow. All are ephemeral. And even we ourselves, our body is Martya, is mortal. Mortal has come from Martya. Sarvendriyanam jarayanti tejaha. Indriya is your sense. So all five senses are the Panchendriya. So these indriyas, these senses of ours, they are always looking to be satisfied. They are making demands. I want something to taste, I want something to touch, I want something to see, I want something to hear. You want to listen to good music, you want to eat good food, you want to play with good stuff. All these are your senses. You sense the world through your senses. And your senses are always clamoring inside you. I want more, I want more, I want more. And you're always feeling somehow. You want to give, okay. You want to play, I'll play. Okay. So these senses, they only make us old. As we consume more and more, we become older and older. This is a scientific fact that if you eat less, then your age is increased. Yeah. If you eat 80% of your hunger, then you will live a little longer. And if you overeat, on the other hand, you will live a little less. So all these things, the more you feed your senses, the more you age. So that is what Nachiketa tells Yama, that if I take all these temptations which you are putting before me, it will only ensure that I will age faster. So doesn't help me. And the whole of my life is short only to fulfill my desires. You people are small, but people who live a long life, and when they are ready to die, if you ask them, are you ready to die? Nobody will say yes. They want to live 1 second more, they want to live a minute more, they want to live a year more. Why? To feed their senses. That senses, sensual desires are never fulfilled. We will never be happy that, okay, that's it, I don't want to eat anymore. You will never be able to say it. It will always be short. It will always be. You will always want more, more, more. On your deathbed, when you're not able to walk, when you're not able to eat, still you want to live. So that is why he says, Tavaya Vahas, Tavanritikite. Let all these vehicles you're giving me will filled with apsaras and all, let them be yours. Let this Nritya and Geet which they are doing, let them be yours. I don't know. Okay. So then I want to tell you one more verse. This is now when Yama starts getting into telling him what is life. So he says, Anyachveyo anyabhutev priyas te ubhena nate purusham sinitah ayo shreyad danasya sadhu bhavati hyatirthadya upriyo vrinite. So Yama says that there are two things in life. One is prayer, that which is pleasant, and one is shreya, that which is good. So there are two things, one which is pleasurable, which gives us pleasure, and one which is ethical, which is good, good for us, good for society, good for everybody. So these are the two things which present themselves at every step. You may think you are small and everything your parents have to do. That is not so. From when we become little bit knowledgeable, two things keep appearing in front of us, good and bad. Good and not bad necessarily, but pleasurable. Okay, the pleasures of life will present themselves, and then there is that which should be done, which is dharma. So in among those two, and they come in the part which is pleasure that binds the soul, and the part which is shreya, the which is kalyanakari, which is good, which if a soul accepts, then that leads on to salvation. So this is another concept which is there, that there we have a cycle of birth and death, also called reincarnation. So the soul leaves this body after death and takes up a new body, lives another life, again gets dies, is born somewhere else, and so on. So it's an endless, infinite cycle. So it continues to stay trapped in that cycle. As long as we love this world will keep getting us back in the form of a body. And one day, when we decide, okay, I've had enough of this world, I don't want this anymore, then he becomes ready to look for himself, the soul, which you don't see today, and God. And when you take that path, which is actually completely different, they're two opposing paths. Either you take this one or you take that one. They don't merge anywhere. So that path if you take, then you achieve moksha. In Buddhism, this is called nirvana, and in Christianity, it is called salvation. That means that you stop having a body. You live as yourself. Now, this has several advantages. While you may love your body, because God has placed inside you one very deep desire to survive. This is an instinctual thing which all beings have. And however much actually people may have read texts like this, like the Upanishads and the Vedas, it is only the very, very Pachava Vyaktis, those who have really seen God, who get over this desire to cling to the body. So this body has, we have this intense desire for the body, and so we keep sticking to it, and we never know what we are. And you are actually, your powers are much more than this body. So I can prove this to you in a very simple way. You may not believe me, so I will give you a small sample. Do you agree with me that all souls are equal, all living beings, or no? How many believe souls are different? Hands up. Are there, you believe there's some higher souls, lower souls? Or do you believe, yeah? Yeah, sure. No, I'm not saying that they are all one. I'm just saying that there are, souls which are higher. Say, men's souls are higher than women's souls, or earthworm soul is lower quality than your soul. No? Clear? So now, if your soul and an earthworm soul are the same, then how come the earthworm does not have eyes? Does the earthworm have eyes? No. So how come it cannot see? Because what did give it eyes? You know, if God had given him eyes, he would have seen. But God has made sure he doesn't have eyes. So he has taken away the power of the soul to see. Understood? So the soul had the power, but God made sure it does not have that power in this body. Similarly, you have almost limitless powers on your own. But God has made sure that you are limited to the five senses. You are in effect in a jail. You enjoy that jail because God has made it such that we enjoy this jail also. But we also have sorrows and we all suffer some pain which is because of your body. Actually, your soul is free of pain, is free of sorrow. All your sorrows originate from your body. So the day that realization comes into you and you take sannyas, sannyas you know? No, okay, I'll tell you. So once you give up this world and you take sannyas, that day your journey towards yourself begins. And you start leaving this prison of the body behind. So now this sannyas. So in our philosophy, in our tradition, life is divided. Life is firstly considered to be 100 years. Average lifespan is considered 100 years, which today, with all our technology, we consider a very long life. But in our this thing, there was an average life where you lived well. So for 100 years, when you live, then it's divided into four equal parts of 25 years each. The first 25 years are called brahmacharya, in which you perform, you live a chaste life, you live a very disciplined life of a student. You put in all your energies to be to learn as much as you can. You have come into this world knowing nothing. In your mother's womb, you were only eating. Now you came out, you are still eating. So now human beings have the power of the intellect. So they live through 25 years acquiring knowledge. That 25 years also, these days, very few, only doctors and some other people, some PhD people will study till 25. Most of us start working at 21, 22. Anyway, so 25 is ideal. If you want to start earlier also, it's okay, no problem. Next 25 years, you have a family. So you get married, you have children, you have a job, so you contribute to your family, you contribute to society, you contribute to the nation, you contribute to the world. You are a global citizen today. So you are now putting in your efforts to do things. Then the next 25 years, you are supposed to turn spiritual. And you are now say, okay, I have lived a full life for 50 years, I have enjoyed this world. Now I'm beginning to become a little old. I want to move on and discover something about myself, something which I can take into my next birth. I am now approaching, now I'm on in the later part of my life. The first part is over when I was all excited and all. Now things are on the decline. Let me now look for myself, do things for myself. A lot of people, a lot of you would relate to that. So for 25 years, they are actually supposed to do spiritual study, and this is called Vanprastha, in which actually these people used to go to the forest. They used to leave all their belongings and leave for the forest, and there they would sometimes get together and study together and do meditation together, perform havans together, or they could go singly also. Actually, even husband and wife could go together. But of course, they have to live as not husband and wife. Then the next 25 years, that is 75 to 100 years, they would take sannyas. Hopefully by the end of 25 years, they would have discovered themselves, they would have learned something. Now it was the time to give it back to society. Okay, while uh, they would be living you can say almost a beggar's life because they don't do anything and they are only sitting with God most of the time. They are meditating. They are thinking of, they are with themselves, with their soul. They don't need anything much. They don't need to eat much. They don't need to wear much and so on. You see these Buddhist monks, right? So something like that, like the Dalai Lama she was talking about, something like that. Yeah. So those are monks, actually. Sannyasis are monks. Right. I think you understand Buddhist monks. Right, so that is sannyas ashram. Now, in our the same, actually even in Buddhism, I think they do some work, but in ours it was the duty of the sannyasi to go to people like you and tell them about dharma. Grihasthis, the people who had families, they don't get time. You know, they're always short of time. They don't get time to learn texts and all. So these people are supposed to come and just like I'm telling you, they're supposed to give you small capsules of information and put you back on the path of dharma. So these are called the four ashramas. 25 years each, totaling 100 years. First one, Brahmacharya ashram. Second one, Grihastha ashram. Third one, Vanaprastha ashram. And fourth one, Sannyas ashram. Clear? Clear? Okay. So, where are we on the diagram? I need to wrap up for all this. Yeah. All right. Okay. So before I wrap up, I would like to tell you one more Vedic precept, Vedic principle. There are three things in this universe that are eternal. Eternal means they are not born and they do not die. They are immortal. They always existed and they will always exist. Okay. What are these three things? Can you tell me? Anyone? Okay, not on. Okay, you tell me. Come on. I have to give you a chance. Okay, good. Do you agree with God, soul and God? Are they eternal? Yeah, maybe. Soul is. Okay. God is. Okay. Third thing, which is the third? Prakriti. Matter. This. See, this. Obviously, it will break up one day, right? So it came into existence. Somebody made a table. Somebody made plastic. They made a table. One day this table is going to break up. So how is it eternal? It is like your body. If your soul is eternal while your body is dying, it is because this is just an outer covering. This also matter has an original form. All matter starts from one original form. Then it splits into all these things which make up this world. And you can make some of those things. God makes some of those things. And then in the end, they will all get destroyed. So then just like you have a cycle of birth of the body and the soul, similarly you have a cycle of the birth and death of the universe. So we have this concept of a Big Bang. Every uh, beginning of the universe, there is a Big Bang. The whole universe is generated. It grows bigger and bigger, and more and more different things are created. More new elements are created. New items are created. This whole universe expands, and then it starts shrinking and goes into returns to its original form. That is, so this beginning is called Srishti and this end is called Pralaya. So matter starts from that form, that is a primordial form, expands into all these things which make up this universe, and then they again shrink back into their original form. Okay, just like you know, you say take this piece of paper. It has come out of wood, which has come from trees, which has come from some seed, which with the help of the sun, water, earth, it grew into a tree. So now when I burn this piece of paper, it is reduced to earth. So earth is from where the seed started, and now earth is where the seed will end. Similarly, the whole universe has a cycle in which matter starts as something, becomes a whole lot of things, and then goes back to being, something very reduced. So this is one of the concepts which I want to give you. So you can see how close our thinking is to science today. How our thinking is so vast, it's so deep. It's, when you read about these gods and goddesses and the silly things they do, these are all mythology. They are fairy tales. Actual science is lying in our text. The only thing you have to go to our original text, ones which are ancient, where the knowledge is lying in a form which is little difficult for us to read now, but it is still there. That is one thing I wanted to tell you. Then also I wanted to tell you a bit about Sanskrit. How many of you study Sanskrit? Okay. I see only four hands. Huh? You are deciding that good for you, good for you. So let us say five. Five hands. So you may be finding it a very difficult subject, right? You find it a difficult or an easy subject? Huh? Difficult, right? Yeah, sure. One reason is that we don't use it today. So just like, if you look at somebody else, some things become clear. So like Latin is not used today, so they find Latin difficult. But at one time, Latin was being spoken. Similarly, Sanskrit was being spoken in India at one time, and it was not difficult. Now also, if you ask me, I can speak in Sanskrit for you. So it's not as if the language is difficult. No language is difficult as far as human interaction is concerned. Only thing is we are not familiar with it. So just like Assamese may be difficult for you, similarly Sanskrit is difficult for you. So it's natural, it's okay. But I must tell you that all this knowledge is lying in Sanskrit, number one. And this language is like no other language. It is so scientific. It is so beautiful. The more you study, the more you will learn about life. Now, this might be a little difficult for you to believe. So, I will give you an example. Let me just tell you a little bit more about Sanskrit. First thing which you see in a whole lot of languages which are influenced by Sanskrit, like English and Latin, Greek, all these are actually come from Sanskrit. The common thing between all these is that there is a concept of a noun and a verb. Do you know what is a noun? Yes. Do you know what is a verb? Yes. Right? Easy. Noun is the name of a thing and verb is the action. Now this may seem very simple to you. Okay. But if you think about it, it is actually a very deep concept. And if you look at languages that are not influenced by Sanskrit, you will find that those are those hieroglyphic languages, like the Egyptian hieroglyphics or the Chinese language, the Japanese language. If any of you are learning any of those, you will find that there, that symbol, each symbol almost tells a story. So if you want to say man drinks water, so that one symbol will cover the whole thing. Man drinks water. If you want to say woman, then you will need to add another symbol in front of that man drinks water symbol to indicate that there is a woman drinking water. Why? Because they don't separate the person from the action. This action is not such an easy thing to separate. If some of you older people will know what is an abstract concept. So this action is an abstract concept. It is not something which it's like a number. So we have one apple, two apples, three apples. One orange, two orange, three oranges. So what is common between three apples and three oranges? Only the number three. And that number three, you can't touch it, you can't feel it. It is something which only your brain comprehends. Similarly, the action is comprehended only by the brain. In Sanskrit, action is separated, noun is separated. And now you have infinite combinations of noun and verb, adjectives, adverbs, adjectives describing noun, adjectives describing verb, and life becomes so simple. You will know Chinese people are not able to learn English. Why? And we are so good at it. Because it's just the same as our language almost. It follows the same structure. So this is one greatness of the language which has come from our language. Now, if you understand verb, we have roots. That is a base form from which each verb originates. For example, do you know Hindi little bit? So if you have padna, to read. So read is the root of reading, reads, read. All those forms are created out of one root called read. We have around 2000 of those, over 2000 roots. To those, you add prefixes and suffixes to change the meaning. One of the meanings which you know is reads, reading, has read, will read. All these are around read, you are conveying different meanings, past tense, future tense, etc. Okay. Same thing happens in Sanskrit and you can generate even more meanings. So when you add all these things together, you are actually having infinity of words and meanings. Now you may ask me, so what's so great about that? I can generate new words every time and I can describe what I want to describe. So I will tell you what is the influence of language on your thought. In the around 18th century or so, when Christian missionaries were spreading all over the world and trying to spread Christianity to all parts of the world, then they went to Africa in large numbers and they went to interior parts of Africa and they found one tribe over there which is called Hottentots, which was living in a very small area and very small tribe. So in their language, when they asked them for numbers, they had a word for number one and a word for number two, and then they said many. So when you have a language in which you have one, two, and then many, can you have maths? Will you ever be able to do 10 into 76? Never. In the Vedas, the whole decimal system is given. Biggest numbers, which is 10 to the power 28, which people till the decimal system was accepted in the 19th century in France. Till then, those numbers people could not get their head around a number like 10 to the power 28. This is given in the Vedas. So you are blessed with a language which gives you tremendous power to think. You can put things together like nobody in this world. If you study Sanskrit, you will find your maths improving. You will find your physics improving. You will find your biology improving. That is the amount of influence the language has on thinking. Now, to give you a sample of what I am telling you. There is this word called Ayu. Have you heard of this word Ayu? What does it mean? Tell me. Age. Okay? Clear? Age. Now this word is composed of two parts. A and U. U is a verb root, as I told you. And that verb root means mixing and unmixing. Both mixing and unmixing. And A means also two things. From and until. So from and until, mixing and unmixing. How does this give you age? Tell me. Yes, you want to answer? Can you? Sure. Sorry? No? No. That is in time only, from and until. So from and until. Mixing and mixing. Any more? Come on, you are intelligent guys. So where's the mixing and mixing? You're close actually. You're close. Tell me, tell me. You're close. He's giving you a clue. He's also giving you a clue. Put together. From until mixing and mixing. So your age starts from your birth and ends with your uh, death. Even today you have an age. So in between also there is an eye. When you were born, the soul was mixed with the body. They were brought together, the soul and the body. Are you from the mixing of the soul with the body until the unmixing of the soul from the body? So if the second part does not apply to you, if you are still living, you can leave the second meaning. But your ayu is from the time that you were mixed with this body. Can you see how beautiful this meaning is? Can you see how lovely this is? Can you see how it opens the doors and windows of your mind? This is how deep Sanskrit goes. This is how lovely it is. You know, don't get stuck with what is taught in your books, but it is important to learn what is in your books. If you don't learn that, you will never learn this. So, learn it now. When you come to my age, when better than that, when you are a little bit older, you can learn these things as well, and you will be blown away. It is so beautiful. It is more than anything in this world. Like this is such a small word I told you. Every word in Sanskrit is has a meaning. And it is a philosophical meaning. It is not a useless meaning like useless. Useless. Use it less. How does it become of no use? So this is a stupid language. It constricts you. It stops you from thinking. If you study Sanskrit, it will open your mind. You will think different. You will learn different. That is my guarantee to you. With that, would you like to learn a Vedic mantra or is it too much? We should call it a day. Vedic mantra. Okay, so I have a beautiful Vedic mantra for you. विष्णो कर्माणि पश्यता यतो व्रतानि पस्पशे इन्द्रस्य युज्यः सखा. This is a mantra from the Rig Veda which says that see the deeds of Vishnu. And by this Vishnu, it is not meant the Vishnu lying on Kshiர Sagar, but Vishnu means the one who is omnipresent, Vyapak. That is called Vishnu. So the one who is pervading this universe. See his deeds. What are his deeds? Nature, this whole world, this whole universe is his deed. He makes this universe, he destroys this universe. These are his deeds. Your body is his deed. He has created it for you. Okay, so see his deeds. Yato vratani paspashe, by which accept your own, by which take up your own vrata. Vrata again doesn't mean keeping upavas. Huh? Vrata means that which you do all the time, which is always there with you. Like you are always good to people, right? That is another. So that, like that, take your deeds, learn the lesson from him. What he is, you should be like that. Because Indrasya Yujya Sakha. Indra, that is you. Why are you Indra? Because You are rich. See, Indra directly means into someone who has wealth. So what is the wealth you have? Even if you are poor, you have wealth. What is the wealth you have? No. Oh, yeah, I will take it. Let me take other people as well. So who wants to answer? Tell me, what is the wealth which a soul possesses, even if they are poor? Knowledge, sure. And body. Body too. Right? This body is actually a big gift from God to you. It can do so many things. You know, we were talking about how the senses give us pleasures. So these pleasures are not, no, not completely bad in the sense they are not the right things for the spiritual side. But as long as you enjoy things ethically, there's nothing wrong with it. So ours is, not like a very sannyas-oriented religion which says no, always just take, get up and get out and leave everything. No, you should lead a grahastha ashram in which you enjoy things, worldly things, but ethically. Never steal from anybody, never kill anybody for anything, never do bad things. But acquire your wealth honestly and enjoy it. Nothing wrong with that. So we also have this wealth of the body plus all these things which we can enjoy. Yuchya Sakha. We are the best friends of God, and God is our best friend. And Sakha, I must tell you, is another Sanskrit word which means Samana Jnanam. Yes, yes. The Sakha is one who has the same description as, say, me. Why? Have you seen your friend and you are the same, right? You enjoy the same movies, you enjoy the same books. That is why you're friends. If you don't enjoy the same thing, very often you're not friends. Okay, some thinking is similar. That is why you connect and become friends. So similarly, you and God, you have consciousness. He has consciousness. This matter is inanimate. It has no consciousness. He cannot be friends with this silly thing. He can only be friends with you. And he is your friend since time immemorial, and he will stay your friend forever and ever. All your friends will come and go, your parents will come and go, everybody, this whole world will come and go. He will stay with you. So spend some time being with him. Please read some Upanishads. धन्यवाद.